Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Fix Computers. I've got a cool computer here that I wanted to show you guys. There's not going to be any particularly interesting repair with this today, it's just a routine service. But it's just a cool computer that I wanted to share with you guys. So this came in earlier on in the week, and it's an official The Yogscast PC. So for those of you who don't know, the Yogscast were a massive YouTube channel that blew up into fame over their Minecraft Let's Play videos. And the owner of this computer is a young client who was obviously massively into Minecraft back in that day, massively into the Yogscast. They told me how they'd been to several sort of conventions and stuff like that and met the Yogscast and all the rest of it. And they were just like, oh yeah, don't watch them so much these days. And I was like, that's okay. You're allowed to move on with your life. But also that was awesome that it was really important to you at the time. I love fandoms. I'm mega into fandoms myself. And I really like seeing other people who are into fandoms because fandom is awesome, basically. It's really cool to have something that you're super interested in and is super important to you. This is just in for a service. The client has had it for a long time. It's never been serviced. It's getting a bit old and tired. So we're just going to take a look at it and brush it up and see what we can do with it, basically. It's super dusty, and we're going to put an SSD in it. So I thought the first thing we'll do is we'll just open it up and just explore what was in the Yogscast official computer. Literally says official computer on the side of it. So from a quick look, it's actually not a bad computer. So this has been made by Chill Blast. They were obviously the partner for building these systems up. And this is a fractal chassis. So they built it in a good chassis with this cool... I thought it was a paint job, but I can actually see now I'm taking the screws out the back that it's actually a vinyl wrap. So if I just take the cover off here, it slides back and lifts off, old style. So you can see in the corners here where this case has been wrapped in just a vinyl wrap all the way around the edges, but it's really nicely applied. You practically can't tell. They took out the grills and everything. You can see just on the insert there where it just cuts in between the grill. So you end up with a perfectly smooth finish, and it's held up really well. There's no dinks or scratches or anything on this. Bit grubby, but that's fine. So cool custom vinyl wrap on the case, and I'm not sure what model this case is, but as you can see, it's a fractal design, so we've got the logos there. And we've just got a simple ITX build in there, which is a bog standard OEM build, really. We've got a Zotac card in there. No idea what that is yet. We're going to take a look, though. We've got an Aerocool power supply in there that is currently probably dying from dust inhalation from the bottom. Reverse mount your power supplies, kids. I'm going to start opening this up and seeing what else is in there. So as I mentioned, we're going to put an SSD in this, but I also want to see what other scope we've got for future upgrades. So let's start taking out some of these hard drive cages to give ourselves some extra room, and we'll see what we can do with this. I haven't seen this case before. It's an interesting design for a cube computer. I do like how they've got thumb screws on the back of these drive cages, but Phillips at the front, which kind of defies the point, but anyway. I'm not a terribly huge fan of... I'm not a massive fan of low-profile or small form factor computers, but I mean, if you took out this drive cage, you'd be able to fit a pretty big graphics card in there, so that's not bad. So that's one of the drive cages. So with the hard drive cages removed, we've revealed a couple of 80mm fans up the front, which again, there's a lot of dust in here, but the fans look like they're in reasonably good condition. I don't think they're moving much air because I think we're going to find a hell of a lot of dust on that front intake. But it looks like the fans themselves are not too claggy. The rear fan isn't. That's only just got some surface dust on it. Got this interesting... double zip tie strap holding the CPU fan in place. I'm not sure what that's in aid of. They must have decided that was necessary. Maybe they put that in there just to make sure that these things could be shipped through the post. without fans falling off and stuff like that, because this is just rubber mounted. So maybe that was just to ensure it would survive getting shipped about. Let's keep going. I think. Well, how much more am I going to take out? I'm going to take out that graphics card so we can find out what that is. And right, graphics card out. Oh, it's a 750 1 gig. Yeah, that's getting on a bit. Well, I suppose that would have been just good enough for Minecraft back in the day. We wouldn't have been able to run any particularly exotic texture packs or anything like that. I think we're going to find 2nd or 3rd gen Intel in here. So okay, and then down the bottom there we find it's got 8 gigs of RAM in it, which isn't bad for the age of the computer. And we've got an Asus H81i Plus, which is 4th gen Intel. So it's got a Haswell CPU in it. Not sure what CPU it is yet. We'll find out when we start it up. But that's not too shabby, to be honest. When I pulled out a GT750, I was worried we were going to have 2nd or 3rd gen. But 4th gen, although it's getting on, it's kind of old, it's passable. You can run 4th gen Intel these days. It is okay. As long as you don't want to be on the bleeding edge of AAA games, you'll be completely fine with one of those. So yeah, this would certainly appreciate a slightly higher graphics card. You could drop in a modern budget graphics card like an RX 570 or a 580, and you would really supercharge this computer again. So it's definitely worth spending a bit of money on it, I think, for the time being. Plus, any parts that we fit to this, like the SSD or even a new graphics card, you could easily carry over to a new build in the future. So we're not throwing good money after bad here either. We're just making some minor investments now that can be reused later on down the line. Right, in the meantime, I'm going to take this out of the bag and we're going to blow all of the dust out of this thing. And then once we've done that, we'll go ahead and we'll get the SSD fitted and we'll boot it up and we'll give it a bit of a service. Alright, there we go. So that is looking a whole lot better. Now it's not pristine. The air compressor won't get surface dust. You can see I can still draw a line across the power supply there. So if you wanted to, you could go mad with paint brushes and things like that, go over it all with a microfiber cloth and do all of that, but it's not terribly necessary to sanitize it basically. Just getting rid of the worst of the dust is absolutely fine. And we've just made sure that all of the vents are clear, all of the filters are clear, and that is all set and ready to go. So it's an interesting arrangement for the power supply in this one. You can see we've got the plug comes in at the back here, and then we've got this wire going along the bottom, and then that just plugs into, there's the back of the power supply there. Because for a minute when I was dusting out the bottom, I was like, where's the intake on the power supply? And I had to actually stop and think for a moment, so that was kind of fun. In any case, I think we're good to reassemble this. So we'll stick the graphics card back in, and we'll put in the original hard drive and the SSD, and we'll boot this thing up and start prepping it for the SSD conversion. I still need to take a look at I've kind of missed the boat on it, but I still want to look at the Meshify C, like the little Meshify case. I've seen the big one and I don't really care for it, but I want to look at the little Meshify that's designed to go head to head with like these kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it's a nice looking case, and yeah, Fractal have just got. They've got quite a nice understated look to them. They've got like that premium feel, but without the gamer flair of NZXT or Corsair, you know.
I love the sleekness.
Yeah.
It's so sleek.
Yeah, agreed. So I need to do a little bit of work with the wiring in here just to make preparations, because we've only got power for one drive in place at the moment. So I'm going to have to unpick some of these cables and rearrange them. They've currently been sort of arranged over the top of the power supply, which I have mixed feelings about. Like the back of the power supply is here, so I would have bundled it all around there. But then by putting them over the top here, it does leave more space around the graphics card, I suppose. But yeah, I guess that was just the builder's choice. At any rate, I think what we're going to do is we're going to bury this one and undo this one, because we've got a 4 SATA chain here. We've also got some extra wiring around this area here. This is going into, we've got a fan switch on the back for high, medium and low fan speeds, which is just all of this. And all of the case fans are connected up to that guy. And part of me kind of wants to redo all of that and get them onto motherboard fan headers. However, it's not really necessary for me to do that. And I think we only have one extra fan header. We've got a chassis fan, and I think that's literally it on this motherboard. It's an ITX motherboard, so it can easily be replaced with more modern stuff, but not a lot of choice on that guy. ITX is still a bit threadbare back in these days. It was still reasonably new, so there's not a huge amount of options for it. And when you're running ITX, you're kind of limited on what you can do. So I'm just at the stage where I'm trying to fit all the drive cages back in, and this is the point where we find the joys of building small form factor, and it's just a game of Tetris where it all fits in, but you've got to do everything in a very specific order. Because of how much room this tower cooler, which is just a fairly modest Akasa, because of how much space that's taking up here, as you can see, the clearance between the power connector there and that fan is pretty horrifying, and I'm actually concerned about being able to fit our SSD in there. I think I'm going to move the SSD down to this end point here. So I've just plugged in the original power connector that was going to that hard drive, and we'll use this extra chain that I've unpinned just purely for the SSD alone. I was kind of hoping to have a nice little fresh daisy chain, but just due to the positioning of that cooler, that's just not possible. And this isn't down to the way the computer was built or anything, it's just the perks of small form factor, man. I've done small form factor a couple of times. I'm done with small form factor. These little all-in-one computers like the Corsair One and that new NZXT case, they're all the rage at the moment, and I'm just like, just don't. You'll regret it. It's awesome when it works, but when you've got to work on it, hoo boy, have fun. Right, that can go in last because it's empty. So let's put our SSD down the end here. I'm just going to thread all of our wires out the side of the case. And for now, I'm just putting in a screw at the front and a screw at the back, and I'm loose fitting them, which just gives me enough room to be able to just jiggle the cages about and make sure that everything is just seated nicely. And then when we're finished, I just tighten up all the screws. And there's our SSD mounted up on the end. So we've got another SATA cable coming across and around into there. And we've got just the power cable in there and tucked behind the SSD. So one of the other advantages of having that zip tie we've got across the CPU fan is it's also preventing any cables from being able to press into the fan. I'm not sure if that was deliberate or not, but it's having a nice effect of just making sure that none of the cables can stray into the path of the CPU fan, which is quite a concern with this build, because it's more or less impossible to keep that fan clear. So thankfully though, with the combination of the front fans, the CPU fan, and then this rear exhaust, I'm not worried about airflow here at all. So now I'm going to fire this thing up and we'll start doing the software side of it. So we've got to service Windows and we've got to transfer everything that's on the hard drive over to that SSD. So let's get this thing fired up. All right, so we've got this thing started up now, and first things of note is Windows 7. So we've got to get that upgraded to Windows 10, and no, 7 is not an option anymore. It's out of critical support. Move on. Come to terms with it, everyone. It's running Windows 7, so we've got to get that updated, and also it's hella slow, this thing, like horrendously slow. And there's a couple of contributors toward that. In terms of spec, I was hoping for an i3 or an i5, but we've actually got a Pentium G3258 in here, so lower end CPU. This thing was really built just for the bare minimum to run Minecraft, really. That was about it. We're lucky it's got 8 gigs of RAM, to be honest. In the meantime, it is 3.2 gigahertz, so that's not horrendous. However, our internal hard drive is only 500 gigabytes, and it's only got 50 gigs free on it. So we're really chock-a-block on the drive. So we can expect this hard drive to be fragmented into a billion pieces right now. And that's probably why we're running so horrendously slowly. This is also going to make our migration from the hard drive to the SSD more complicated, because obviously the SSD, after formatting and losses, is probably closer to 420 or 430 gigabytes. So we actually don't have space. However, this isn't a problem, because once we've got the SSD set up, we'll have a 500 gig SSD and a 500 gig hard drive. So we're actually going to solve the speed and the storage problem in one fell swoop. Okay, so I've freed up some space on the hard drive, which means we've got a little bit of space to move about. And in addition to that, we've got enough, our space used is low enough to comfortably fit onto our 500 gig SSD. However, there's a problem. Because this hard drive was heavily fragmented, what we'll actually find is that some of the data is actually down at the end of the drive, because this bar here shows all of your data nicely on the left and a block of free space. That's not what it actually looks like on the drive. On the drive, it will actually be fragmented to hell. And I can demonstrate that by opening up a defrag program. I've got Auslogic's defrag portable here. And if we open this up and do just a very quick scan, that's what the data actually looks like on the drive. And as you can see, we've got stuff all the way down to the end of the drive. Now, the program that I normally use for doing internal backup and imaging is Drive Snapshot. And one of Drive Snapshot's disadvantages is that it copies your data block for block, which means Snapshot will ask me for a destination drive that is big enough for the end point of the data down here. And our SSD is not quite big enough, because due to geometry, our SSD actually ends up as being 447 gigabytes, whereas this hard drive is 465. So we're just short. I was really hoping it was going to fit in for the sake of being a nice simple video, but this is why I haven't done any videos on migrating from hard drives to SSDs, because there's so many little pitfalls and minefields that it's really difficult to make a coherent video about it. In any case, my solution to this is going to be to switch to Norton Ghost. Now, I don't recommend Norton Ghost because it's a really old bit of software that costs money. I just happen to have a really old version of it just from way back when I used to work in the business department. Now, the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to take both the hard drive and the SSD back out of this computer and plug it into an old machine that I have that is specifically set up for doing Ghost work. So this doesn't really help you guys out much, but hey, this isn't a tutorial. This is just what I'm doing to overhaul this computer. So I'm shutting this down and we're going to set up the ghosting rig. Right, this old thing, this is an old HP, and it's got an i3 2100 in it or something like that, second gen i3, I think. It's old enough to comfortably run the old version of Norton Ghost I have. However, it's also new enough that I can just plug in a couple of SATA drives. I don't have a hard drive fitted to this. It's just got a DVD drive with a Norton Ghost CD in it and a couple of SATA leads sticking out of it. So when I want to image my hard drives, all I have to do is just plug in the drives, which is actually quite tricky because these things are in cages. I probably should have moved them out of the cages. I think we can make this work. And then I just start it up and it'll automatically boot into Ghost. Ah, the joys of DVD drives spooling up. Okay. Right, so, as said, this is a really old version of Ghost. Oh, well, copyright 2007. That's not bad going. So what we're going to do, I'm going to do a local drive disk to disk. And so I want to go from the hard drive, which is going to be slightly bigger. So that's going to be drive number 2, because that's 476 gigabytes. 476 megabyte, 1000 megabyte. Yeah, 476 gigabytes. So select 2. And our destination is drive 2, which is 457. And now Ghost will automatically resize all the partitions for me, which again is the nice bit. And I can just leave all of these at the defaults and it will just magically sort that out for me. So I'm just going to tab down to OK. Destination drive will be overwritten. OK, off you go. Now the disadvantage of Ghost is that it's hella slow. This is not a fast program. Even though we're going onto an SSD, it's not quick, which is again one of the reasons why I prefer to use other methods. However, Ghost is incredibly consistent. So even though we have issues with going from a larger drive to a smaller drive, this should work just fine. The other disadvantage of Ghost is that it doesn't like bad sectors. So if you're trying to migrate from a failing hard drive, Ghost is probably not your friend. But yeah, you can see at the moment our time remaining is jumping up to 2 hours already, and it's sailing. This is probably going to take all afternoon, which kind of sucks, but that's where we are now. So I'm going to leave this to run, and I'll get back to you guys when it's finished, because we're going to be here for a long time. See you guys after the cut. Okay, our data imaging is now done, and while I was waiting on that progress bar, I just did a little bit of rerouting of cables down the side here. I had a call from the client, and they also want to put a bigger graphics card in, so I'm waiting for that to show up, but I rerouted these cables just so there's a nice big gap to put a nice big graphics card in. So more on that when the card shows up. I'll tell you a bit more when the time comes. However, as you can see, I've rerouted some of these cables. I've also adjusted it because with 2 drives in, there was just too much going on in front of the CPU fan. I wasn't really thrilled about that. But now I've reordered things. Our SATA cables are both going straight out this side, so hopefully we should have a bit more space now. With the graphics card going in, there won't actually be room for all 3 of these hard drive cages. Hypothetically, you could get a Dremel and just go across that side and then put this one on the end, and that would stop the graphics card from clipping onto this. However, it's easier, considering we've got one completely empty cage going back in, we'll just leave this one out, basically, and we'll just leave a gap over there that leaves plenty of space for the graphics card. Right, and so the drive cages we've got here, each of these cages can take 1 drive on each side, so you can actually fit in up to 6 drives into this case, which is quite impressive. However, the problem is the drives back right up to just past this strut bar, which means the middle one cannot possibly have a SATA power connector plugged into it and clear this tower cooler. So we've got 2 options for that. One option is we could move the fan to the other side of the cooler so it's sucking air through. However, I don't know how well that will interact with this rear fan, this cooler may be less effective with the fan sucking air through it rather than blowing, because the fan doesn't exactly make a seal around the fan. You can see we've got a big old hole there, for example. So a blow configuration would definitely be more effective with this cooler. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take this SSD out of this cage, and I'm going to reverse mount it on the other cage. So you'll see what I mean by that in a moment. Okay, so there's our hard drive cage, and as you can see, I've mounted the SSD the wrong way around. So because that puts its connectors at the back, it means that there's no connector sticking out this side, which will foul up on the fan. So that gives me clearance to stick all the drives in here, and then we've got an empty cage goes in here, and then the end cage we're leaving out for clearance on a big graphics card. So let's get all that wired in. There we go. And that's both our drives fitted into a single cage. And that is all happy. So now we'll stick in one empty cage just to try and keep as much in the case as possible. I really hate leaving stuff out of a computer case because it just means you've got to look after it somewhere else. However, needs must in this instance, so we'll just have to deal with that. And this cage, we've just got to keep that in a safe place somewhere. Right, so now we're just waiting for our graphics card to show up and we can get that fitted. Okay, right, so now we've got everything hooked up. As I turn it on, I'm going to spam the delete key on the keyboard to get into BIOS because we've got two drives connected that both have Windows on them. So I need to make sure that it actually boots from the correct place. So as soon as my capture card sorts itself out. Okay, and what I need to do, I need to drill into the advanced settings and find the boot options. And if we scroll down here, we've got, so boot option 1 is ST500. So that's our hard drive, so that's wrong. Now this is an Asus BIOS and it groups types of boot sources in there. It puts types of group sources into groups. So you'll notice there's no option of the SSD there. To find that, what we have to do is go into hard drive BBS priorities. And here we can specify which drive we want to be the booting drive. So this is a terrible idea and they still do this on their modern BIOSes, but whatever. So we're going to switch that over to CT480, which is our Creative Technologies 480 gig SSD. And now if I go back, you can see boot option 1 is now the SSD. So I shall now save and restart. Save and reset. And now we should boot up off of the SSD. Everything is going to look exactly as it did before, except suddenly everything will be super quick. So we should find a very rapid startup time now. So here it goes through post. Oh yeah, Windows is a bit upset. That's fine. Start normally. Starting Windows. And here comes the desktop. That's SSD speed. That's not booting from a hard drive anymore. You can tell straight away. I remember the joys of when SSDs first kicked in while we were still on Windows 7. And just the first time you boot from an SSD and the Windows 7 startup animation doesn't even have time to complete before it gets past that. So in this instance, our desktop is still a little bit sluggish to load because there's still a lot going on here. But now we're into the stages where we can now sort all of that out. Okay, right, so before we kick off the Windows 10 upgrade, I want to do a little bit of tidying up. The first thing I want to do is there's a lot of stuff that loads up on boot. And while a lot of it is useful things that we probably want running in the background, I don't want them to open on startup. So let's start with this Blizzard launcher. We'll go into settings. And have we got an option? No. Okay, so there's no setting to tell that not to run on startup here. So we'll get that elsewhere. Same goes for the Razer software. We can't tell that not to open without signing in. Oh, are you kidding me? And same goes for Spotify. This is why I hate all this software. I don't need all of this to open when I load the computer. Fine, we'll get it another way. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to load up the registry editor. So I'll hit Win and type in regedit. And I'm going to go current user, software, Microsoft Windows, current version, run. Okay, right, battle.net, that's the Blizzard app. CCleaner, we don't need that to run on startup. Chromium we're actually going to remove because it shouldn't be there at all. Chromium is a developer tool, shouldn't be on a general use computer. Daemon Tools, that doesn't need to run on startup. Discord, that is okay. We'll let Discord run on startup. Spotify, that's getting shot as well. Razer Synapse, that will have to stay unfortunately. And Lavasoft Web Companion, that doesn't need to run on startup. We're not removing any of these apps, we're just telling them not to run immediately when we boot Windows. So for example, battle.net, that's going to start when they try and run Overwatch. So, we don't need that to start up on boot. So local machine, software, Microsoft, Windows, current version run. So same place but for local machine. Right, we've got Avast. We're actually going to uninstall Avast because Windows 10 has got built-in antivirus that is better than all the third-party ones. So we'll be removing that separately. Crash Plan, that was their backup utility, so we'll leave that alone. Realtek high def audio, that doesn't need to run in the background. That runs at the driver level, so we'll remove that. And finally, software, WoW 6432, Microsoft Windows, current version run, Carbonite backup. Ooh, we got two potential backup solutions here. We'll have to have a look to see which one is actually being used. Webcam software doesn't need to run on startup. Java update doesn't need to run on startup. And USB 3 monitoring doesn't need to run on startup. Go away. That's that. And while we're killing startup settings, I'm also going to right-click on computer and go to manage. And we're going to check the task scheduler for stuff that's running on startup as a scheduled task. There's always a lot of junk in here. So all of this stuff, this is Windows Update remnants, that can go. Acrobat updater, that can go. The Avast stuff can go. Actually, I'll leave the Avast because we're going to run the uninstaller for that. CCleaner, no. Choice stuff. Google Updater can stay because it actually works. McAfee isn't in use. NV battery boost, no. NVIDIA driver updates, no. GeForce Experience, no. More NVIDIA rubbish. A lot of NVIDIA rubbish. Some sidebar thing, no. Get rid of all of that rubbish. Make the computer twice as fast. Avast we're going to uninstall, and that's that. So now we'll uninstall Avast, and then in a moment we should find that the computer is running a fraction of what it was on boot up. And we haven't actually removed any software. We've just said we don't need this to run on startup. Don't run until you're told to. So we'll remove this. You'll notice how much faster the computer is operating as well. This is why I didn't want to do any of this until we were onto the SSD, because the computer actually runs really quick now because SSD performance. So we're actually making progress. While I wait for that to uninstall, I'm going to see if I can figure out what that crash plan was. Okay, so I've just started up Crash Plan and it's asking me if I want to make an account or if I have an existing account. So clearly they're not using this at all. By comparison, Carbonite backup, that is running in the background. I'll just open that up and check. Nice, so we've actually got a status here. Your files are safely backed up. So that's a cloud backup service. Last backup was 8 days ago. So yeah, that needs an update, but that's okay. So Carbonite is running, Crash Plan isn't. So we'll actually uninstall Crash Plan because it doesn't need to be there. So we'll get rid of that in a moment. So I'm going to go through remove Avast and remove Crash Plan, then I'll restart, and then we'll see where we're at. And we should be ready to kick off the Windows 10 update. Right, one reboot later, and we've got significantly less clutter now. There's still a couple of bits that are opening on startup, like Synapse and Discord, but that's okay. I'm okay with one or two items. We just didn't want that was opening up before. Our system tray looks a lot tidier than it did previously as well, which is also nice. So I think we're in a position now where we're ready to do the Windows 10 upgrade. So I'll close these items again. And now I'm going to plug in a Windows 10 flash drive and start the update. So if you want more information on how to make a Windows 10 flash drive and how to do the Windows 7 to 10 upgrade, I've got a video on that. So search my channel for Windows 10 Wrangling. It's a fairly recent set of videos, and it will show you how to do all of this in detail. But in the meantime, I've plugged in my flash drive. I'll hit setup.exe, and we will kick off the update. And this is going to do an inline update, so it retains all of the user data, all of the programs, all of the settings, everything, and just takes us up to 10. So I'll just carve straight through this. I'll see you guys once we've done the update. All right, one progress spinner later. We're going to say no to all of this stuff because we don't want any of that. No, no, and basic. There we go. Right, and we're back on the desktop. So now I'm going to reconnect to the internet and we're going to smash through Windows Update. All right, that's all our Windows Updates done. So as you can see, we now have resolution and we have a start menu and we have performance. And it's running really quick. Look at that, just bam, load stuff up in an instant. So this is all done. There's a few customizations left to do. Just simple tidying up and doing some basic preferences that I apply to the computer. However, the next thing I'm going to do is shut it down because the graphics card has arrived. So I've got here a Radeon RX 590, which is mirrored because I've got the camera mirrored at the moment. So the RX 590 is a previous gen graphics card. However, these things are crazy good value for money at the time of making this video. They're like 150 or 160 pounds Great Britain, and these things punch way above that price tag. These things go toe to toe with like 200 to 250 pound graphics cards. So for an older computer like this, where we're trying to upgrade it on the cheap, that 590, absolute turbocharger. So I'm going to shut it down, get that graphics card fitted, and we can put all of the covers on for the last time. There we go. One enormously bigger graphics card than the old one. That thing's going to be great. So now let's start it all back up again. We've got to uninstall the NVIDIA drivers and install the AMD drivers now. Now, to do this, you can use programs such as Display Driver Uninstaller, DDU, and go the whole hog with this kind of thing. However, unless you're actually having problems with your graphics card, it's not really necessary to go that far. I've got computers where I've switched back and forth between AMD and NVIDIA graphics cards several times over, even with both drivers installed at the same time, and not had any problems at all. So I'm not saying that it's a waste of time to do that. However, you don't need to do so unless you're actually having problems. Right, I'm going to grab the cover for this. Now, there's one more thing that I've got to look out for, is that the old graphics card was dual DVI. It had a mini HDMI, DVI-D, which is digital only, and DVI-I, which can be adapted to VGA. However, the new graphics card is DisplayPort, full HDMI, and DVI-D, so there is no VGA output here at all. And I'm not sure what kind of monitor that the customer has. Realistically, anyone with a gaming computer is probably not using VGA, but you never know. So I'm going to make sure that I've got a HDMI to VGA adapter in stock, because the cheap HDMI to VGA adapters, they work just fine. That will be the solution if the client is still running a VGA monitor. Hopefully they're not. However, I'll keep one on hand just in case they are. So if they turn around and go, oh, I can't plug in my monitor, I can go, here's an adapter. So that's the plan there. Right, so we're back into Windows, into the realm of no resolution. So I'm going to go ahead and uninstall the NVIDIA software first. So I'll just search for NVIDIA. And we'll just uninstall everything to do with NVIDIA from the top to the bottom. Right, now I've done that, I'll run the installer for the AMD drivers, which I've already downloaded on another computer and copied onto the drive of this one. So it's worth noting, of course, that if I just plug in the internet and run Windows Update again, Windows Update will fetch some drivers for me, but Windows Update will never have the latest version of the graphics drivers on there. It'll have a working version. However, graphics drivers are one of the few times where it's actually prudent to be on the latest version, because graphics drivers are always at the bleeding edge of performance. So this is one of those few times where I actually care about getting the latest drivers. For more or less anything else on the computer, I don't care. I just want a driver that works. However, for graphics, 99 times out of 100, you want to be on the latest at any given time. So we'll let that install, and then we'll have our resolution back. Right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to deal with the old hard drive, which has still got Windows on it. So now we've established that we've copied everything across to the SSD, the hard drive is now effectively expendable. We know everything is transferred across. So I'm now going to flatten the hard drive entirely so it's completely blank. Now you'll notice we've got a system reserved D drive. This is the system partition from the old hard drive. So what I actually need to do is clean the drive to clear those partitions. So what I'm going to do is right click on Start and bring up a PowerShell admin window. And I'm going to type in disk part to get the command line disk partitioning software. And I'm going to list the available hard drives, list disk. So we want disk 0, which is the larger drive. So select disk 0, and I'm going to offline the disk just to verify that I've got the right one. And if it successfully offlines the disk, yep, that's fine. So now, as you can see, those extra drives have disappeared. So this confirms that I'm dealing with the correct hard drive because it's not going to let me offline C drive. So that's just me doing a quick verification that I'm definitely using the correct drive here, because the last thing I want to do is erase the SSD accidentally. Right, so now what I'm going to do is do clean. Oh, we've got to online the disk for that. Fine, online disk. And now we'll clean it. Bam. And there we go. Right, and we'll close that. And now if I right click on this PC and click Manage, and then I'll click on Disk Management, we'll now find that we've got an uninitialized hard drive. So I'll initialize that as a GPT disk, and I'll make a new simple volume and drive D, and we'll just call that data with a quick format. There we go. Right, and now if we go back to this PC, we now have just a nice big data partition. And so now the next thing that we need to do, that's pretty much everything. So the only thing that's left now is I need to advise the client on how to use this data drive. So the difficulty is that, as I mentioned earlier on, this client has got lots of games across lots of different launchers, which makes it difficult for me to migrate everything for them. However, what I can do is I can sign into Steam and tell Steam to start saving all of its games onto D drive instead. And that will at least move the bulk of their games across. So let's run up Steam. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is in the Steam settings, we're going to go to Downloads. And we've got an option here saying Steam Library Folders. So I'll open that up and I will add a library folder. Oh, which you can't do because it's downloading stuff apparently. There we go, right, and I'm going to select D drive, new folder, and I'm going to call it Steam Library, and select that. There we go. And now I want that to be the default location for any downloads. So right click on that, make default, there we go. So any games by default will be installed to D drive instead. However, at the time of downloading a game, when it tells you where do you want to install the game, this is how much space it's going to use up, you can select which drive it's going to be put on. So for certain games that you want to be on the SSD because it makes a large difference, you can put those onto the SSD. And for small games or indie games that have zero load time anyway, you can just stick those on the hard drive, which doesn't really matter. So that's that. Right, so now we're pretty much done, but I'm just going to go through a couple of personalization settings that I generally do on Windows 10 now, which is what I call my comfy setup. So I'm going to check. I'm going to set our, let me see, I'm going to set the general colors to be the same as what they were in Windows 7, which was a sort of a lilac color. So I'll set the accent color to sort of lilac purple, whatever that was, and we'll set that to everything. And I'm going to go into themes and set the desktop icons to have computer and user files in, because it just makes those things easier to find. On the start menu, I'm going to turn off suggestions and turn on most used apps, which makes it easier to find things that they're using, and it will stop it from throwing up adverts for random games and stuff. And then in taskbar, I'm going to set always show icons in the bottom right corner, which it looks like is already on. So that's that done. And I'll just set the desktop icons so this PC, recycle bin, and the user folder are in the top left corner. I'll empty the recycle bin. Right, and that's it. That thing is ready to go. I'm going to turn off the Cortana icon as well, and I'm just going to collapse the search box because that's obnoxiously large. And I'll just pin some stuff on the start menu just to make things accessible. There we go. That's a half decent start menu. Right, and there we have it. That is our computer fully upgraded. So we've got an SSD in there. We've set that up to be the main system drive with all of the users' data on it, so they won't have to reinstall anything except for a couple of Steam games, but that's an easy download to do. And all of their games can now be installed on the hard drive, so they've got more space. And we've got it put in a big-ass RX 590 graphics card to boost the game performance. And coming up from this GT 750 that they had in there before, that's going to be an enormous graphical upgrade. So that's that. So past that, this old computer will now see another good few years of service, no problem at all. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.